Okay. All right, starting. This is the fifth meeting of the cartography. That's kind of cool. If you look down at all these things, we can see all of the wonderful things that we've accomplished together this year, despite the pandemic and the awful global events. But uh, pretty happy with the kind of engagement that we've been getting and working together with all of you. But today, I think that it's probably going to be a relatively short meeting. I don't really have all that much to talk about. I'm thinking about just going over really quickly about the things that we had in our monthly release. And I think that a monthly release or a release whenever we feel like it makes sense. So like at minimum, we'll make a release every month, and unless somebody says something and says, "Oh, I really want this feature in the next release," then sure, we'll do that. Then probably going to talk about some extra ideas. I see that Dan's up adding in another idea there. Thank you for doing that. And some things that we need help on, and yeah, there's a to-do item. But if you but while I'm talking about the monthly release, if you have other things that you want to talk about, please do add them into the agenda, and then we'll head into that. How's that sound?
Sounds all right. Sounds good.
Cool. Yeah, so share this tab. Yeah, so we not a super active month, but some pretty hard-hitting ones, I think. So I went on this little rabbit hole about request.get having a timeout, and then so the thing with that is turns out that if you don't put a timeout on request.get, then you'll have a sync that hangs for 3 days. So the lesson here is always use timeouts. And with GCP, there's I was talking to Ramon about this, there's some pretty great improvements that I made where rather than ping every single resource that we hope to get on every single project and wait for a 400 error, we actually only sync the resources that are enabled for a project. And I found that, at least in my own testing, it leads to like a 5-time speed up factor. Your mileage may vary, but this is pretty good.
Nice.
And not only that, we only retrieved the first 1,000 projects before, and then so now we actually retrieve however many projects you have. Turns out that this API is paginated, and yeah. So, and then this is a tricky one because GCP, it likes to, no matter where you go, I guess GCP is very eager about creating new projects for you, even if there's like no compute resource or anything like that. And then some housekeeping stuff, split the EC2 sync to multiple files, and then added public IP addresses. So this was a pretty good release. And then there's some other new ones, other good new stuff coming up soon. Okay, so that's that. Couple ideas I wanted to just kind of touch on real fast. There's this issue here about Docker. So this discussion about Docker, and then just some new updates here is that there's some discussion about having a Docker container available at the bare minimum for testing of cartography. And in my opinion, it seems that there's two things that this needs to do. Well, one, it needs to be able to give you a Neo4j environment. And two, it needs to be able to load up Boto 3 credentials. And so toward the end of having Boto 3, there is some challenge about specifying Boto 3 credentials to the Docker container. This is a little tricky, but I did get that working with this little code sketch that I have here, where all you got to do, you give yourself a config file, build the container, specify a profile, and then run this guy. And then the key thing here, the key things here are like to specify in your config having an environment as your credential source, and also having, what was the other key thing? Oh, like these volume mounts are pretty important too, because like you want to be able to mount the actual AWS folder to this path on the container, and then these environment variables. And so I've actually have it running a test script that will do something like this. It'll just list all your regions, and in my testing, it works. So this could be the direction that that the other Docker PR takes. This is just kind of where we're at on Docker for the project. Any other thoughts or questions or anything like that? Cool. All right. And then so back over to the agenda. Just wanted to touch on that a little bit. And then there's one PR on VMware support. Personally, I am not a VMware user, so I'm not the best person to do this. I'm just bringing it up here in this meeting in case somebody listens later on. Yeah, we would like to have, we'd definitely be open to helping you out with starting a PR for adding VMware cloud support, but it's not something that I personally have a lot of context or experience on. And thoughts on streaming changes support. You want to talk on this a bit, Dan?
Yeah. First, just one comment on like the VMware cloud support. Be interested to see if like, we long term want to start thinking about like what are the abstract interfaces we want for these things. So, when we write analytics jobs in the future, it could be something that's more like, hey, check all the compute resources, whatever they are on whatever cloud, see if they have public IP addresses or not, instead of trying to get like vendor specific implementations. So I feel like that would make it easier for someone who wants to add VMware support to know where to start and like what interfaces they need to do at a bare minimum.
Yeah, that's a good point. You're talking about generalizing a plugin, essentially, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, that way that rather than having to rewrite a lot of boilerplate, you can just maybe add in a couple lines saying that this is my resource provider, and then so go figure out how to do the rest of it.
Exactly.
Yeah, this is something that I've spoken with Andrew and Marco about a little bit, and kind of a little bit of background on that is we've taken the approach of keeping everything as we've taken the approach of having lots of copy paste in the project because we've been afraid of taking a incorrect abstraction too early. The idea being that like if you abstract too early, then it's going to be tough to decouple everything later on. And then so we wanted to be like absolutely sure that we were making the right interfaces. That said, yeah, we've gotten to a state where things are starting to show a lot of copy pasta. So there's a couple of things that can help with that. First, I've started on a couple of different PRs that I think can serve as good examples on adding new plugins. I'll just share really quickly. Won't take too much time here, but I did recently add in just like 9 hours ago, I added in support for the Jamf data source. And so my intent here is kind of to show everyone like what is a minimum PR. And by the size of my scroll bar here, you still see it's not the smallest thing in the world, but it's not awful. The idea being that you add something to specify credentials, and then you have all your statements, et cetera, et cetera. But the idea being that should you want to add a new data provider to cartography, please follow this format. And your initial PR, make it as small as possible. Like just only include literally like one data type. In this case, I only added Jamf computer groups, and that's it. And you have a minimal set of all the boilerplate that we need: credentials, tests, schema docs, et cetera, et cetera.
Nice. I like that.
Yeah, and then so there's this one for a brand new one, and for like brand new data providers altogether. And then there's one that I submitted just yesterday about specific to AWS plugins, since majority of the people that I think that are cartography users are AWS users. So this is like a minimal set for an AWS oriented PR. So this is for Redshift, and then so this would have like I said, the minimal set of having a doc, having some cleanup job, and then just a very few data types. So in this case, we only have clusters. Yeah, literally just clusters, and then just connecting them to their accounts, that kind of thing. So if you want to add in a new AWS data type, just follow this PR. Yes, there's a lot of boilerplate, but it's a starting point until we can actually invest cycles into really generalizing everything and abstracting everything. One final point that I want to make on this topic, I'm glad you brought it up, is this couple of different ideas here that me and Marco were talking about, where he had this issue where he getting region issues, and so for retrieving data, he's needed to surround a lot of things in a try except, and in order to handle invalid region issues or credential errors. And he's done the same boilerplate for like every single data provider in AWS, which is obviously not ideal.
Mm-hmm.
And then so a little bit of the conversation that we had is, well, you know, like you were saying just right now, Dan, it's just that you know, we want to have a general solution eventually, but right now for this, the intermediate solution would be to write a decorator to handle this exception handling for region stuff, so that other developers don't need to do the same, you know, copy pasta all over the place. You just add in a decorator to do this exception handling for regions. I think where generalizing the sync will have the most impact will be on the load functions, because whenever you load a function to the graph, you always need to set this last updated field. You always need to set a first seen field. You need to do all kinds of boilerplate there. So I think there'd be more value for the load personally, but I guess this discussion here, I'm just trying to provide a little bit more context that, yeah, this is something that we're definitely thinking about. Oop. Okay. Any other thoughts or questions on that before we go on?
I think that kind of ties into the next part too, where you know, streaming changes into the graph. Yeah, I bring this up because we have a couple use cases that would be nice to have more real-time information in the graph versus the batch processing. I think it would probably be pretty painful to implement some of these things in the streaming way. And doing the streaming, like you said, the boilerplate part of it might be a good place to start abstracting some of that out. But really, it's just, you know, comes down to the design decision of like, do we want the graph to be a snapshot of, you know, or a supposed snapshot of a one piece in time of what the state of things look like, or do we want to have the this is what it currently looks like and keep historical, or just throw away all the historical side and just keep, you know, whatever our freshest possible one. I know when it comes to detection and kind of like the instant response side of things, it would be great to have most up-to-date and also historical information in the graph that could, you know, will add complexity to queries and possibly just make the graph get enormous very quickly. But I just wanted to kind of start conversation here and see, you know, how much need there might be for other people to have something like that, or if it makes sense to just kind of solve that problem in, with a different system.
Right. Yeah, no, good points. I spoke with the Amundsen team not too long ago about, I think they have different sources for that, where they're similar. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, Amundsen is another Lyft project, and they also use Neo4j. So we share a lot of the same technical challenges with working with Neo4j, and then how do we do our ETL jobs and things like that. And one, I guess, data model that they were talking about is they primarily have a very similar data model to what we do, where we pull from all our sources on some specified cadence. They do use airflow though, whereas ours is more, I don't know, homegrown, to put it in a nice way. And they also played with a push model, where you have the data source actually push in those changes to the Neo4j database. But from what they were telling me, they said that this was something that was basically not really used as much as the pool model, for a number of different reasons. That it was a lot more straightforward to work with the pool model. Um, I think that we have that workaround with drift detection for historical things. I think if the concern is to get more up to the minute data, more data that is up to date, then what we could do is think about having a system that reruns syncs more often, if that makes sense.
Yeah, like targeting specific use cases for running a sync more often.
Yeah, or at least subsets of a DAG in the sync more frequently. And then like what I'm thinking is that at the leaf nodes of every DAG should be a drift detection job, because there's no reason for a drift detection job that only detects changes in AWS to wait for GCP to finish, for
Yeah.
example.
Yep.
So that is one thing. But at the same time, if if a sync fails and drift detection still runs, then we have a huge problem there, because there's all kinds of broken assumptions there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um,
I like that as an interim step. I was thinking another kind of intermediary step would be uh, kind of building an interface internally that makes the final stage of loading data into the graph be a streaming, even if the actual gathering of the data is a batch job. So, you could simplified envisioning of it of like, you have a batch job that then puts things on a queue that streams things into the graph. So that way, the next step of actually streaming things is not very difficult, and you don't break the batch jobs in the process. But I think what you're talking about might be the more pragmatic approach in the short term for achieving similar goals.
yeah, I'll be super transparent here. Like my view on at least my view when it comes to data architecture changes is very limited. What I'm Most of the things that I'm looking at when it comes to changing these kinds of questions is maybe at most a month in advance, simply because of the pace that we've been working at. Um, I haven't been able to necessarily be too forward thinking, but I do like the idea and I want to support that. And, I am supportive of those kinds of changes. I think that let's maybe put together a spec or some kind of diagram, or let's whiteboard this out together.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah, I like the
I mean,
both of your ideas.
yes, I could start by opening an issue in the repo, and then we can start having the conversation there and add diagrams, and etc.
Yeah, let's start maybe start like a public Google Doc and then just throw it in the channel.
Yeah. Okay.
And yeah, no, definitely. I'm a big fan.
Cool.
Okay. Last couple. Anything else on that topic? Okay. Yeah, last couple things. We would like a tester for this particular issue. Not necessarily asking you guys to work on this, but if anyone else is listening that happens to have this region issue, I would like to have a tester for this 290 PR. I did make some changes to it most recently, and because I don't personally have this region problem, I don't have the ability to test for it, but I think it should work. But until then, I'll just leave this. I'll leave this PR unmerged. Okay, and next. Ah, this this issue I'll kind of leave for Andrew next time he has a chance to go and take a look at it. But there is a bug reported about resource permission relationships. I might have time to look at this also, but something about if we can test this, if we can test this permission in the resource permissions sync, it should iterate character over character. Sounds like yeah, sounds like a weird iterator bug, possibly. Yeah, we can look at this later on. Well, I'll wait for. I'll reach out to Andrew on that one though, or if I have cycles, I'll just take a look too. And the last thing I want to show is that on the roadmap that we have, I will start moving some of the items on our open source roadmap to issues so that people know what we're working on, and that way other people can take on and champion an issue if it happens to address some of their own goals also. Yeah, so I'll start doing that. I think that that'll help the project as well, help the project move a little faster too. That's kind of all I have. Do you guys have anything else?
Not me.
Nothing for me.
Okay, cool. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and call it. I'm gonna turn off the recording, and yeah, good meeting. Stick around a little bit though after. All right, thanks everyone.